Imani had always been different, though no one could agree on exactly what made her so. Some said it was the way her eyes lingered a moment too long on people, as if she were reading something hidden beneath their skin. Others whispered about the way she paused before speaking, as though weighing the truth in the air around her. But those who truly knew her, or thought they did, believed her gift was older than she was, something woven into her spirit before she ever took her first breath. At 23, she had grown into a quiet, graceful woman whose presence unsettled as many people as it comforted. For Imani could sense danger before it arrived. She could feel lies sliding beneath someone's tongue before they were spoken. And sometimes, when the night grew too still, she could hear warnings carried on the wind, soft whispers only she could understand. Her family knew this, though they pretended not to. Her stepmother avoided her gaze, always finding a reason to leave the room when Imani entered. Her brothers grew stiff around her, forcing laughs and careful words, as though they feared she might peel them open with a single look. Behind closed doors they called her unnatural, cursed, dangerous, but only when they were sure she couldn't hear. Except she always did. She sensed their fear like a weight in the air, a coldness pressed against her heart, heavy and suffocating. Yet to the village, Imani was something else entirely. She was a guardian in plain sight. When storms threatened but had not yet formed, she felt the shift in the wind and warned the farmers to cover their fields. When a traveler with a too-sweet smile tried to sell stolen medicine, she sensed the deceit festering behind his grin and quietly murmured the truth to the elders. When a child wandered too close to the riverbank, she felt the pull of danger before the child's feet even touched the muddy edge. Her voice saved lives, protected families, and steered the community away from harm time and time again. The villagers did not understand how she knew, no one did, but they trusted her. They listened when she spoke. They watched her with cautious reverence, unsure whether to thank her or fear her, but unable to deny the truth in her warnings. Mothers sent their children to greet her at the market. Elders asked for her insight during disputes. Hunters sought her counsel before leaving at dawn. And though some whispered old stories of seers and cursed visionaries, most agreed that whatever gift Imani carried was meant to protect them. But her family saw something else, something that threatened the delicate lies they lived behind. Each time Imani revealed a truth, their unease deepened. Each time someone praised her, their envy grew sharper. And each time she walked into a room with her steady, knowing eyes, they felt exposed, as though their secrets hovered just above their heads, waiting to fall into her waiting hands. They smiled at her in public, nodded when the village complimented her, pretended to be proud of her gift. But beneath their masks, fear twisted into resentment, and resentment into something darker. Imani felt it, though she wished she didn't. She sensed the coldness in their words, the hesitation in their steps, the bitterness that clung to them like a shadow. She tried to ignore it. She tried to focus on the good, the grateful villagers, the sense of purpose, the whispers of warning she followed to keep others safe. But at night, when the house fell silent and only the crickets kept vigil, she lay awake beneath her thin blanket, feeling her family's unease pressed down on her chest. Sometimes she wondered if her gift had cursed her or if the curse came from those who feared what they couldn't understand. Still, she offered kindness freely, hoping that love might soften whatever darkness coiled inside her home. She brought her brothers herbs when they fell ill. She helped her stepmother grind spices for meals. She tried always to be gentle. But deep down she knew something was changing, something shifting like the tremor before a quake. Her spirit whispered warnings she didn't yet understand, and each day the air around her family grew colder. She sensed a danger forming not outside the village, but within the walls she slept in. And though she didn't yet know what shape it would take, she felt it approaching, slow and steady, like footsteps in the dark. Their home had always been a place of murmurs, soft, bitter ones that clung to the walls like dust. Imani grew up learning to read the tension in a room the same way others learned to read footprints on wet soil. She knew when someone was lying, when danger was near, when intentions were shaped like knives even behind the warmest smiles. Her gift, as people called it, had saved the village more than once. She had warned the farmers before the locusts came. She had sensed sickness in a neighbor's child before the fever even rose. And yet, within her own household, her gift was treated like a stain that refused to wash off. Her stepmother, Sifa, was the first to fear her, not openly, not with words, but in the way her eyes sharpened every time Imani spoke. Sifa ruled the household with a quiet but iron-hard grip, managing every coin, every favor owed, every deal made behind closed doors. To her, control was survival. And nothing threatened control more than a girl who could sense the truth before it was spoken. When Imani walked into a room, Sifa's fingers twitched as though reaching for a way to silence her. Imani's brothers, Jemba and Kito, followed their mother's shadow. Both were older, stronger, and spoiled by the belief that land and legacy belonged to them simply because they were men. They saw Imani's gift not as something divine, but as something dangerous, something that could unravel everything they built their dominance upon. For years they tolerated her because the village praised her, because the elders often asked for her insight, and because standing against her would have exposed them too soon. But inside the house, the tension tightened like a rope around her neck. The turning point came the day Imani sensed something buried, not in soil but in hearts. She felt it when she walked past the family storage hut. A cold rippled down her spine, a whisper in her mind that said something is wrong here. She could not name it, but the feeling lingered like smoke. Her stepmother noticed the way Imani paused near the hut, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. Sifa exchanged a look with Jemba, quick but heavy. In that single glance, Imani sensed fear, guilt, and something darker, desperation. That night, Sifa spoke to her sons in voices too hushed for ordinary ears. But Imani, who had learned to hear danger even in silence, sensed the shift in their intentions. She felt their resentment sharpening, turning from dislike into something cold enough to harm. She felt Kito's anger thrum like a drumbeat through the walls. She sensed Jemba's trembling apprehension, fear not of her but of being caught. And from Sifa she felt a resolve, brittle and cruel, forming like ice around a forbidden truth. They had a secret, one that could shatter their place in the village if Imani ever sensed it fully. A secret they were willing to bury. Imani did not yet know what it was, but she felt it rising like a storm beneath the floorboards of their home. And her family felt her growing closer to uncovering it. That was when the fear in their eyes changed into a decision. A decision to silence her before she saw too much. The night they chose was moonless, thick with the smell of damp soil and distant smoke. Imani had felt unease pressing against her chest the entire evening, like invisible hands pushing her back each time she tried to step outside. She could sense something shifting around her, something heavy and cruel, but she did not know it had already taken form in the minds of those she trusted least. Her family moved with a strange calm, too quiet, too careful. Jemba avoided her eyes. Kito hummed under his breath to mask his nerves. And Sifa wore a smile too thin to be real. Imani felt the danger circling her, but she didn't expect the attack to come from behind, so suddenly, so brutally. She stepped into the courtyard to fetch water, and in the next breath a cloth came down over her mouth. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her body. Another hand tightened around her wrists. She tried to scream, but the sound died in her throat as rough fingers shoved a gag between her lips. She fought, twisting, kicking, trying to let out the cry forming inside her chest, but she was outnumbered. "Hold her still," Sifa hissed, her voice trembling not with guilt but urgency. Kito tied her wrists with rope thick enough to burn her skin. Jemba held her feet, his jaw clenched so tight it trembled. For a moment, just a flicker, Imani locked eyes with him. In that single glance she felt everything inside him. The fear, the guilt, the betrayal he couldn't swallow. But he didn't loosen his grip. They dragged her out of the compound like a captured animal. The night swallowed their shadows as they made their way toward the forest outskirts. The crickets fell silent as if even nature sensed the cruelty taking place. Imani struggled, her breath ragged beneath the gag, but the ropes cut into her wrists and ankles, making every movement a fresh wave of pain. "Don't look at her face," Sifa warned her sons. "She sees too much. If you hesitate now, it will be the end of us." The forest grew darker as they approached the clearing where the earth had already been disturbed. They had prepared the grave, dug wide and deep under the cover of night. Imani's heart hammered as she was dragged toward it, but even then she sensed more than fear. She sensed the secret beneath their panic, the thing they believed she had almost discovered. The pit yawned before her like a hungry mouth. Sifa nodded to her sons. "Do it." Jemba hesitated. Kito did not. He shoved Imani into the grave, her body hitting the cold dirt with a force that knocked the breath out of her lungs. Soil crumbled around her, clinging to her hair, her clothes, her skin. She thrashed, trying to lift herself, but the ropes pinned her like a trapped bird. "Forgive us," Jemba whispered, not to her but to himself. Sifa shot him a sharp glare. "There is no forgiveness for those who threaten their own blood." Imani tried to form a plea, a question, anything, but the gag swallowed her voice. She could only stare up at them, her eyes wide, burning not from fear alone, but from the hurt of knowing she was being erased by the people who were supposed to protect her. The first shovelful of dirt hit her legs. The second hit her chest. Cold earth poured over her, filling the space around her body. The weight grew quickly, pressing against her ribs, her arms, her throat. Each breath grew thinner, tighter. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it echo through the soil. Above, her family's silhouettes blurred into shadows, their voices muffled by the growing layer of dirt. "Faster," Sifa whispered. "Before someone hears." The sky disappeared completely as dirt covered her face, leaving only a thin pocket of air. Darkness wrapped around her like a coffin made of night and earth. The weight made her chest burn. Imani's thoughts flickered, not with fear of death, but with the truth she had always chased. The truth she felt beating under every lie her family had built. If she died now, that truth would rot with her. No one would know. No one would see. No one would ever understand why her family feared her so deeply. Her last breath trembled through the gag. And with it, she whispered, not aloud but in her spirit, in the deepest part of her that had always connected with things unseen. "Let the truth rise, even if I do not." The earth swallowed her. But her whisper did not die. The soil above her seemed impossibly heavy, pressing into her ribs, squeezing her lungs until each breath was a thin thread ready to snap. But deep beneath that crushing weight, something stranger began to stir. Something older than the forest, older than the village, older even than the very land her ancestors walked. Imani's whispered plea did not fade into the dirt. It slipped through it. It moved like a vibration, a small trembling pulse that hummed against the roots, then the stones, then the very veins of the earth. The forest, which had been silent a moment before, suddenly shifted. Leaves rustled though there was no wind. The roots around her grave tightened, then loosened as if listening. A chill rippled through the soil, soft at first, then growing like something ancient turning over in its sleep. Imani felt it before she understood it, a tug, a pull, a presence. Her heartbeat slowed, not from death, but from something that was reaching for her. Above her, the trees groaned, bending slightly though no breeze touched them. The temperature dropped in a single shivering moment. A faint glow seeped between the cracks of the soil, blue, cold, and otherworldly, like moonlight trying to force its way into a place it did not belong. Then the trembling began. Not from her body. Not from fear. But from the earth itself. The ground around her grave shivered, small pebbles dancing on the surface. Tiny cracks formed in the soil, widening like something beneath was pushing upward. The air grew heavy with a hum that only spirits could make. A sound like breath, like wind caught between bones, like truth forcing its way into a world filled with lies. Imani could feel the cold energy sliding through the soil, curling around her like fingers made of smoke and frost. It touched her forehead first, sending a jolt down her spine. Then her chest. Then her bound hands. The cold seeped into her veins, not painful but awakening. Her heartbeat, which had slowed to a faint flutter, steadied in a strange rhythmic pattern, like a drum calling her somewhere. The darkness around her thinned, not physically but spiritually. She could feel herself detaching, like her soul was loosening from the anchor of her buried body. Her consciousness drifted upward, then sideways as if slipping through a crack too small for anything physical to pass through. The world fell away. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the grave. She stood on mist, the ground soft and shimmering beneath her bare feet. A gray horizon stretched endlessly around her, but she wasn't afraid. The air here was cold and tasted like memory. Whispers floated through the mist, thousands of them, overlapping, murmuring in languages she did not know yet somehow understood. She had crossed into the place between worlds. The in-between. The veil. The realm of spirits who existed just beyond human sight. She could still feel her body underground, its fear, its pain, its suffocation, but she was also free from it, standing in a space untouched by time. Figures formed through the mist, one by one. They were tall, taller than any living person, their bodies made of swirling smoke, their eyes glowing like distant stars. Some wore the shapes of ancestors she recognized from childhood stories. Others were older, ancient beings whose names had been forgotten by the living. They circled her slowly, their presence neither hostile nor gentle, simply immense. One spirit stepped forward, its voice echoing like wind passing through hollow wood. "We heard your whisper, child of breath and bone." Another spirit touched her shoulder with a hand cold as winter. "You called not for life, but for truth." A third stood behind her, the air vibrating with its power. "And truth is what binds us." Imani's voice felt different here, clear, strong, unchoked by fear or dirt. "Am I dead?" she asked. The spirits shook their heads in unison. "Not dead," one answered. "But not living either." "You stand in the doorway," another added. "A place only the chosen or the betrayed ever reach." She felt the words settle into her like weight and wings at the same time. "Why me?" she whispered. The spirits leaned closer, their cold energy wrapping around her like a shroud and a shield. "Because the lies buried you," they said. "But your truth woke us." Imani looked at her hands, still bound, still trembling in the physical world, but here in the realm of spirits they glowed with faint light. The spirits spoke again, their voices rising like a windstorm gathering strength. "You were not meant to die in silence. Your whisper tore open the veil. And we have answered." The cold energy surged through her, spreading from her chest outward, filling her entire being with a power she had never felt before. Something ancient, something watching, something ready. Imani realized then. Her family buried her to silence her. But her whisper awakened something that would not let silence win. The mist shifted around Imani as more figures emerged, rising from the grayness like memories given form. These spirits were different from the towering, ancient ones. Their shapes were smaller, closer to human size, their glow dimmer but warmer. Their faces flickered, some young, some old, some men, some women, but all carried the same hollow ache in their eyes. And when they drew nearer, Imani understood who they were before they even spoke. They were the ones who had been silenced. One spirit stepped forward, her translucent form wrapped in the faint outline of tattered cloth. "I died with my truth in my throat," she whispered, her voice trembling like broken glass. "No one heard me, until now." Another spirit appeared beside her, a man with deep sorrow etched into his fading features. "They called me mad," he said. But madness was only the truth they didn't want spoken. More surrounded her, spirits with stories buried deeper than their bodies had been. A mother whose children never knew why she vanished. A boy blamed for a crime he tried to warn others about. A young woman framed, betrayed, erased. Their pain hung in the mist like unfinished sentences. Imani felt the weight of them, not crushing but clarifying. Every spirit touched her with cold fingers that left trails of memory. She saw flashes of their final moments, not in fullness but in impressions. Fear, betrayal, unanswered pleas, buried truth. Their stories echoed inside her, weaving themselves into something vast and powerful. One of the ancient spirits stepped aside, allowing a path to form between the crowd. A boy, no older than 16 when he died, approached Imani with steady eyes. "We know why you are here," he said softly. "The living tried to silence you as they silenced us." A chorus of whispers rose around her, agreement, longing, fury, hope. The boy lifted his hand, the mist swirling around his fingers. "You stand at a crossroads. The living world has rejected your truth, but the veil has opened for you, Imani." His voice carried the weight of countless forgotten souls. "You may stay with us. Here no one will hurt you. No one will bury you again." A hush fell over the gathered spirits. "Or," he continued, "you may return." His glowing eyes locked with hers. "If you go back you will not return alone." The mist trembled with a soft rumble, like thunder from beneath the earth. "Our voices," the first woman whispered. "Our pain. Our stories. Our truth," the man added. "It will burn inside you," said another. "It will not be gentle." The boy nodded. "To return is to become a vessel. A bearer of the unheard. You will walk with the weight of every silenced soul on your shoulders." Imani felt her pulse, both in her buried living body and in this half-formed spirit body. "What happens if I stay?" she asked quietly. The spirit softened. "Then you rest," a woman said. "You belong to us. You become part of the silence we keep." "And if I return?" All the spirits spoke at once, their voices rising like a storm of wings. "Then silence in the living world will never survive you." The mist grew still. Imani closed her eyes and made her choice. The third night arrived with an unnatural stillness, the kind of quiet that presses against the chest and makes each heartbeat feel too loud. In the village, windows rattled faintly as if sensing the shift in the world, though no one yet understood what was about to happen. The forest surrounding Imani's grave was hushed, the trees bending slightly under a wind that had yet to touch them. Beneath the surface, in the cold, dark soil, something began to move. Imani's fingers twitched first, thin lines of dirt sliding from her knuckles. The ropes binding her wrists and ankles were worn tight, but she flexed and shifted with deliberate patience. Her breaths were ragged, each one a shallow gasp under the weight of earth, but her spirit was awake, her consciousness sharpened by the whispers of the spirits. She felt them all around her, the silenced, the forgotten, the betrayed, and they gave her strength. She was not crawling out of the soil alone. She was crawling out with the weight and power of every soul that had ever been denied a voice. Her knees pushed against the cold ground, scraping earth from the thin skin of her legs. Her arms lifted in rhythm with her heartbeat, which pulsed like the drumbeats of ancestors calling her home. The first layer of soil gave way beneath her, shifting like reluctant guardians. She breathed in the tight, loamy air, tasting the forest, tasting life itself. Then, with a final push of will and sinew, she rose just enough to tilt her head upward. The surface loomed above like a ceiling closing in, but she refused to falter. A glow began to seep from her skin, faint at first, blue and flickering like a lantern caught in mist. It spread slowly across her hands, her arms, her face. When her eyes met the darkness above, they shone with a strange light, carrying within them the reflections and memories of the dead. Faces she had never seen but had come to know in the in-between hovered behind her gaze, pressing into her consciousness, whispering their stories, lending her courage. She lifted her head higher, and the soil began to collapse around her in small, trembling avalanches. The village below began to feel the change long before they saw her. Dogs howled in unison, ears pinned, tails stiff, hackles raised. The wind shifted suddenly, spiraling around huts and through the market stalls, rustling roofs and bending tree branches as though it carried the words of the dead. Children in their beds cried out in dreams they could not remember, awakened by a disturbance they felt more than saw. Mothers rose to check on them, hearts quickened with unease, yet the source remained invisible. Something unnatural was moving through the night. With one last surge of determination, Imani's body broke the final layer of soil. She emerged covered in earth, her hair matted, her clothes torn, but her posture resolute, unbroken. The glow from her skin illuminated the clearing like a faint sunrise, and her eyes, now carrying the weight of the forgotten and the betrayed, swept across the forest. Every leaf, every branch, every trembling shadow seemed to bow in recognition of her rise. She stood fully, chest heaving, lungs tasting freedom, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The spirits around her whispered, their voices intertwining with the wind, confirming her return. Her lips moved, forming words no human could hear, a promise not of vengeance but of truth and revelation. Even from a distance, the villagers could see the faint glow creeping through the forest undergrowth. Dogs barked and whimpered, villagers peered through windows with wide eyes, and the air carried a subtle charge, the electricity of something alive yet unearthly. The ground trembled faintly beneath their feet, a pulse that echoed Imani's heartbeat and reminded them, though they did not yet understand why, that something extraordinary had returned to walk among them. Imani took a careful step forward, her feet sinking slightly into the damp earth, her body shimmering in the spirit light. She did not stumble, did not falter. Each step carried the weight of every voice that had been silenced, every truth that had been hidden, and every injustice she would soon reveal. The woman who had been buried alive had returned to the world of the living, her presence undeniable, her power unmistakable, and the village would never be the same again. Imani walked into the village at first light, her feet leaving faint glimmers of spirit light on the damp earth. Each step seemed to carry weight, not of her body alone, but of the countless silent souls who now thrummed alongside her heartbeat. The air was thick with anticipation, though no one knew why. Even before she reached the first house, people sensed her presence, a magnetic tension that pulled at their chests and made the ground beneath them shiver faintly. The first signs came as whispers escaping lips before thought. A woman bent over her cooking, staring into a pot of porridge, suddenly gasped and blurted, "I lied about the medicine, I sold it. I kept it from the sick child." She clutched her chest as if struck, and neighbors turned in shock, staring at Imani who had not spoken a word. She walked steadily, her eyes glowing faintly, absorbing every confession, every tremor of fear, but her face remained calm, unflinching. Doors slammed behind her as she passed. Elders cursed under their breath, trembling as if the village itself had become a living thing, responding to her presence. Old wooden boards creaked and shuddered, nails groaning as if the earth beneath them was aware, trying to warn or restrain the guilty. People dropped what they held, eyes wide, hearts hammering as truths they had buried for years escaped before their control. Fathers confessed embezzling the grain stores. Mothers admitted secret betrayals, hushes in the night that harmed others. The air buzzed with the energy of hidden crimes finally surfacing, drawn by her very being. Her family, trailing behind in the shadows at first, felt the first icy fingers of panic creep into their chests. Jemba, the eldest brother, froze in his tracks, mouth open but unable to form a lie. He gripped his heart as if trying to hold the truth inside, but it leaked through anyway, trembling in his voice like glass cracking. Keto staggered backward, his skin pale, beads of sweat forming along his hairline. Sifa's hands trembled, the household ruler's iron grip failing for the first time. Their eyes followed Imani, wide with horror, because it wasn't just her gaze that exposed them, it was the weight she carried, the unseen force of every silenced soul she now embodied. Even the ground beneath them seemed to respond. Small tremors ran through the village square as Imani's steps echoed down the cobbled paths. Windows rattled in their frames, pottery tipped and fell, and a gust of wind swirled in her wake, carrying with it the scent of earth, rain, and something indefinable, justice. Children in the distance began to cry, instinctively sensing the disturbance, though they did not understand why. Dogs barked and howled, tails stiff and hackles raised, circling in uneasy patterns. Nature itself seemed to acknowledge the power walking among them, responding to the pulse of truth emanating from her. Imani did not shout. She did not accuse. She simply moved, and the truth flowed like water around her, forcing confessions to spill unbidden. The village had always relied on her warnings, but now they were powerless to stop the very secrets they had worked so hard to hide. Every lie uncoiled, every hidden cruelty trembling on the surface. People gasped, clutched at their chests, and fell to their knees in shock, the weight of guilt suddenly tangible, almost unbearable. When she finally reached the edge of the central square, she stopped and turned her gaze slowly toward her family. Their faces were pale, their breaths shallow, hearts gripped with icy terror. The power she carried, born from the whispers of the silenced, the spirits of the unheard, was undeniable. Every lie, every secret, every crime they had thought safely buried now surged up, echoing in the village like a drumbeat they could not escape. Imani's presence alone was enough to unearth the truths they had tried to hide, to force justice from silence, and to make the village realize that the woman they had feared and scorned was now the living embodiment of the reckoning they could no longer avoid. By the time twilight descended, the entire village had gathered in the central square, drawn by the strange energy that had begun to pulse through the air. Lanterns flickered in the hands of villagers, but their light seemed dim against the glow that emanated from Imani. She stood at the center, her skin still faintly luminous, eyes alight with the memories and voices of countless silenced souls. The wind shifted around her, carrying whispers that no human ear had heard before, stirring unease and curiosity in equal measure. Imani raised her arms, and the murmurs ceased instantly. The air thickened with expectation, as though the very space between the houses had grown conscious. Then her voice emerged, not alone but layered, many tones speaking at once, overlapping and weaving into a singular, impossible sound. The villagers recoiled at first, stepping back, covering ears, but there was no escaping it. The voices carried weight, resonance, authority, and truth. "Listen," she said, and each word seemed to vibrate through the ground, through the very bones of everyone present. "The secrets you hid, the lies you nurtured, the betrayals you thought safe, all have been heard. All have been felt. All will be known." And then one by one the stories began to unfold. The stepmother, Sifa, could not stop the tremor in her voice, which betrayed her first. The spirits whispered every act she had committed in shadow, the withheld medicine, the poisoned wells, the false accusations against neighbors, all resonating through Imani's layered voice. Mothers gasped, fathers turned pale, and children clutched at their parents' skirts, sensing the gravity of the moment even if they could not understand it. Jemba and Kito, her brothers, could not hide. Every misdeed, the land they stole, the threats they issued, the punishments they orchestrated to silence others, spilled from Imani's voice as though the earth itself demanded revelation. Their knees buckled beneath them as each confession, each truth, left them exposed and trembling. For the first time, the brothers saw themselves as they truly were, reflected not in a mirror, but in the relentless power of the truth made manifest. The villagers watched, some with horror, some with relief, as the crimes of Imani's family poured into the square, undeniable and undeniable. There were no denials strong enough, no excuses clever enough. Every attempt to twist reality faltered against the weight of the combined voices, the voices of the silenced, of the buried, of the forgotten. Even those who had been complicit or who had kept quiet could not avert their gaze. The sheer force of the unmasking left them breathless, shivering with an uncomfortable mixture of fear, awe, and realization. The energy that radiated from Imani rippled across the square, rattling doors, shifting tiles, stirring the soil beneath their feet. Some children whimpered and buried faces in their parents' clothing. Dogs barked and circled nervously, sensing something alive yet unnatural. And through it all, Imani stood still, unwavering, allowing the voices to flow freely through her. The unmasking was not hers alone. It belonged to every spirit that had ever been silenced, every injustice that had ever been buried, every truth that had been denied a chance to live. When the final whispers faded, the square remained silent. Her family knelt, broken and pale, their crimes exposed for all to see. And the villagers, shaken but enlightened, understood what had happened. The woman they once feared had become the embodiment of truth itself, unstoppable and unyielding, and the era of silence had ended forever. The moment the final confessions faded into the night, a deep vibration rose from the earth beneath the village square, subtle at first, like the heartbeat of something ancient stirring from slumber. Then it grew, resonating through cobblestones, tiles and wooden posts, a pulse that mirrored the intensity of the truths just revealed. The ground beneath the guilty shivered and cracked, tiny fissures appearing at first, then widening with deliberate force as though the earth itself sought justice. Sifa stumbled backward, clutching at her chest, eyes wide as the soil beneath her boots split, thin ribbons of darkness curling upward like spectral fingers. It's the earth," she cried, voice trembling. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps as the cracks widened, threatening to swallow her feet. She felt the tremor of her own guilt echoing back from below, a sensation that was neither physical nor imagined but spiritual, a reckoning impossible to resist. Jemba and Keto fared no better. The ground trembled beneath them with each heartbeat, and for the first time, they felt the fear they had so often imposed on others. Shadows seemed to rise from the fissures, wrapping around their legs like coils of cold smoke. The illusions formed by the earth were merciless. They saw themselves trapped in graves that opened and closed at will, dirt raining down from unseen hands, suffocating, pressing, forcing them to relive the terror they had intended for Imani. Their screams, muffled by panic, filled the square alongside the wails of the spirits. The villagers stood frozen, some with faces pressed to their palms, others clutching their children. The dogs barked and circled the trembling guilty, sensing the power radiating from the earth and Imani combined. Even the wind seemed to participate, swirling violently, carrying whispers of every wrong ever committed by Sifa, Jemba, and Keto, as though the forest itself had become a living jury. Imani remained at the center, her feet steady on the soil, skin glowing faintly with spirit light. Her eyes held the faces of the silenced, reflecting every injustice committed by her family. She did not raise her hand or command the earth. She needed only to exist, and the punishment unfolded naturally, as if the land recognized the truth and demanded balance. Sifa fell to her knees, shaking uncontrollably, dirt and dust clinging to her hands and hair. "Please, forgive me," she cried, voice raw and hoarse. "Forgive me, Imani. I didn't know. I was afraid." But the earth did not relent. It pressed her against the weight of her own guilt, forcing her to imagine herself buried alive, trapped under the suffocating soil, the darkness pressing into her ears, the silence devouring every desperate plea. Jemba and Keto mirrored her terror, voices trembling as they begged for mercy. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't let it end like this. Please." Their eyes darted around, but there was no escape from the fissures that split beneath their feet, no hiding from the reflections of fear they had imposed on Imani. Every shove, every lie, every act of cruelty replayed in vivid, unrelenting illusion. They felt the sting of suffocation, the cold grip of despair, the helplessness of being buried alive, just as Imani had once experienced. The villagers watched in stunned silence, understanding instinctively that this was more than punishment. This was reckoning. The earth had become both mirror and judge, exposing the true weight of guilt, forcing it into the conscious minds of those who had long evaded responsibility. Even the elders, who had once averted their gaze from small injustices, recognized the severity of what was happening, their own hearts shivering in acknowledgement of truth. Sifa, Jemba, and Keto clung to each other, shaking, crying, pleading, not for the lives they still had, but for the mercy of their conscience and for release from the torment they themselves had sown. Every inch of the square vibrated with energy, the echoes of the buried spirits mingling with the trembling soil. Imani's eyes softened only slightly, not in pity, but in quiet affirmation that balance was being restored. When at last the shaking slowed, when the illusions began to fade, the family lay gasping, trembling, utterly humbled. The punishment of the earth had delivered not death, but truth made flesh. The fear they inflicted on others was now an intimate, unavoidable reality, forcing them to confront themselves fully and finally. The village, the forest, and the very soil had borne witness, and none could forget the lesson of that night. The village square fell silent after the trembling ground had stilled and the illusions faded. Sifa, Jemba, and Keto lay on the earth, pale, soaked in sweat and dirt, hearts still racing from the terror they had endured. Their eyes, wide and hollow, followed Imani as she stepped forward, her faint glow illuminating the misty edges of the square. Every villager present held their breath, unsure whether she would speak or let the punishment linger in silence. Imani raised her hands, letting the glow of the spirits within her pulse softly, rhythmically. "You may think what has happened is my doing," she said, her voice calm yet resonant, carrying through the air like a clear bell. "You may believe I cursed you, that I called the spirits to punish you. But you are wrong. Nothing I have done could have brought what you faced." Her eyes held them, sharp and unwavering, reflecting the memories of the buried, the silenced, the forgotten. "The spirits came because of your own deeds," she continued, voice layered with the echoes of countless souls. "Every lie you told, every betrayal you committed, every secret you thought hidden, these were the summons. Your actions shaped the forces you believed could never touch you. You did this to yourselves." Sifa's voice trembled as she struggled to speak. I thought the power was yours." Imani shook her head slowly, letting the truth settle into the still air. "No," she said. "The power was always yours to wield, but you used it to harm, to control, to silence. That is why the spirits came. That is why the earth itself responded. The judgment was never mine. It was the consequence of your choices, made visible, undeniable, unstoppable." Jemba and Kito hung their heads, trembling, understanding dawning too late. Every shiver, every terror, every suffocating illusion had been born not from a curse, not from her will, but from the weight of the evil they had cultivated. Their guilt, unchecked and festering, had manifested in the world in a way they could neither contain nor ignore. The spirits had acted in harmony with the truth, revealing what had long been buried beneath lies. Imani stepped closer, her eyes softening only slightly. "You have faced the fear you forced upon me. You have felt the helplessness, the betrayal, the suffocation. And now you see what it is to live in the shadow of your own cruelty." Her words cut through the lingering tension, clear and steady. "Do not blame me. Do not plead for mercy as though I hold it. What you experienced was born from the choices you made, the deception you nurtured, and the injustice you inflicted." The guilty family members shivered, each gasping, grasping at the soil beneath them as if to anchor themselves from the reality they could no longer escape. Around them, the villagers and the forest alike seemed to acknowledge the truth, the air still thick with residual power, humming softly, confirming what had been revealed. Imani's voice softened, though it retained the weight of judgment. "Let this be a lesson. No curse is needed where evil is already planted. You summoned your own doom and it came to you. The spirits acted only as mirrors reflecting your choices. The earth only returned what was already yours." And with that she stepped back, letting the glow fade, letting the village absorb the truth. Their punishment had not been conjured by magic nor by her will. It had been the inevitable consequence of their own deeds, and the memory of that night would linger in every stone, every tree, and every heart in the village for generations to come. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting long golden beams across the village and the surrounding forest. Each ray illuminated the cobblestone paths, the thatched roofs and the trembling leaves, reflecting the still glowing spirit light of Imani, who stood at the edge of the central square. Her form shimmered softly, half woman, half spirit, the ethereal glow wrapping around her like a protective mantle. Behind her, the gathered spirits of the silenced hovered, faint and translucent, yet unmistakably present, their faces serene and grateful. It was a sight that would be whispered about for generations, long after those who had witnessed it had passed. The villagers approached cautiously, some already older now, eyes wide with respect and awe. They no longer spoke of fear or suspicion. Instead, they recounted tales of courage, resilience, and justice. Mothers told their children about the night Imani rose from the earth, the night when truth became a living force, moving through the soil, shaking the guilty and illuminating hidden sins. Fathers nodded solemnly, recalling how even the elements themselves, the wind, the soil, the very ground, had bowed to balance, ensuring no deceit remained concealed. The tale spread quickly and soon, other villages spoke of it, the story growing into legend. They said the earth itself still listened, always attentive to the whispers of the innocent. Any act of malice or attempt to bury a truth would awaken forces beyond comprehension, bringing guilt to light, exposing hidden deeds. Children hearing the story learned that honesty was not just a choice but a shield. Elders realized that silence could no longer protect the deceitful. And through it all, Imani's whisper, the one that had called upon spirits, awakened the earth and unraveled lies, lingered like an eternal echo, teaching each new generation that truth, once spoken or felt, could never be buried. Imani herself became a figure both near and distant. She walked among the villagers, guiding, teaching, and offering counsel. Her voice was soft, but the whispers of the spirits that moved through her gave it weight and authority. When disputes arose, she would step in, letting the past and present meet, allowing the guilty to face their actions, and the innocent to find clarity. Every word she spoke carried the gravity of experience, of betrayal endured and justice achieved. Yet even as she taught, her presence reminded all that power was not born of fear or cruelty, but of endurance, compassion, and unwavering courage. Those who had tried to silence her, the stepmother, the brothers, and others complicit, became cautionary figures in the tales retold around fires and under moonlit skies. They were remembered not just for their cruelty, but for the lesson that their own deeds had summoned the reckoning they could not escape. Even centuries later, parents would warn their children, "Try to hide what is true, and the earth itself will speak against you. Silence the innocent, and you only deepen your own downfall." At sunrise, Imani stood alone at the highest hill overlooking the village. Her spirit light mingled with the first rays of the sun, painting the landscape in hues of gold and silver. The gathered spirits hovered behind her, a protective, guiding presence. Her lips parted, a soft whisper carried on the morning breeze. It was a whisper that spoke of hope, of justice, of truth that could not be silenced. The wind picked it up, carrying it across fields, rivers, and forests, until even those who had never seen her felt the tremor of its meaning. Her whisper became eternal, etched into the memory of the world itself. The villagers who witnessed it understood, it was more than sound. It was a force, a living testament to resilience, a reminder that those who seek to bury truth only trap themselves. And as Imani stood, radiant and unyielding, the story of the woman who rose from the grave and called upon the unseen became legend. Generations would speak of Imani not just as a hero, but as a symbol, a woman whose courage awakened spirits, commanded the earth, and preserved the balance between justice and cruelty. They said that on quiet mornings, if one listened closely, they could still hear her whisper among the wind, a timeless echo reminding the world that truth, once awakened, is eternal, and that no shadow of deceit could ever fully bury it.